Hello, welcome back to Storytime. If you hear any purring coming over the speaker, that is because of Moon right here. There he is. Well, you can just see the black right here. That's nice. He might pop up while we're doing Storytime. Anyway, since last we completed Wind in the Willows, we're going to be starting a new book today, Alice in Wonderland. Alice in Wonderland consists of two books, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking, both of those. But for right now, we'll start with Alice in Wonderland, a copy that I grew up with. I think it was my mom's, and it's old. You can see like the old weatheredness around the edges, and it's also appearing up there, and the little image. I was hoping to get a better image, but for some reason, my scanner is no. I just had to try to take a picture of it on my webcam. Hopefully, I can get a better one later. There's Maestro. Goodbye. So there is a little poem before the story begins, and I don't know if it shows up later, but you might recognize parts of it. All in the golden afternoon, full leisurely we glide, for both our oars with little arms are plied, while little hands make vain pretence our wonder. Ah, cruel three, in such an hour, beneath such dreamy weather, to beg breath too weak to stir the tiniest feather. Yet what can one pour against three tongues together? Imperious Prima flashes forth her edict in gentler tones secundant hopes. There will be no there was in it, while Tertia interrupts the tale, not more than once a minute. Unto sudden silence one, in fancy they pursue, the dream child moving wonders wild and new, in friendly chat with bird and beast and half believe it, and ever as the story drained, the wells of fancy dry, and faintly strung to put the subject by. The rest next time, it is next time, the cries. Chapter 1, Alice in Wonderland, Down the Rabbit Hole. Alice was very tired of sitting by her sister on the bank and having nothing to do. Once or twice she had her sister was reading, but it had no pictures or conversations in it. What is the use, Alice, without pictures or conversations? As she was considering in her own she could, for the hot day made her feel very sleepy and stupid. The pleasure of making a daisy chain would be worth the trouble of getting up and picking the daisy. Only a white rabbit with pink eyes ran close by her. There was nothing in that, nor did Alice think it so very much out of the way to itself. Oh dear, I shall be too late. When she thought it occurred to her that she ought to have wondered at this, but at the time it all seemed quite natural. But when the rabbit actually took a watch out of his waistcoat pocket and looked at it, and Alice started to her feet, for it flashed across her mind that she had never before, with either a waistcoat pocket or a watch to take out of it, and Burning ran across the field after it and was just in time to see it pop down a large red hedge. In another moment down went Alice after it, never how in the world she was to get out again. The rabbit hole went straight up for some way, and then dipped suddenly down, so suddenly that Alice had not a moment stopping herself before she found herself falling down what seemed to be a well. Either the well was very deep, or she fell very slowly each time as she went down to look about her, and to wonder what was going to happen next. She tried to look down and make out what she was coming to, but it was too dark to see anything. She looked at the sides of the well, and noticed that they were filled with cupboards and bookshelves. Maps and pictures hung upon pegs. She took down a jar from one of the shelves. It was labeled Orange Marmalade, but to her great disappointment it was empty. Like to drop the jar for fear of killing somebody underneath, so managed to put it on one of the cupboards as she fell past it. Well, thought Alice to herself, after all this, I shall never think of tumbling downstairs. How brave they'll think me. Why, I wouldn't say anything about it, even if I fell off this, which was very likely true. Down, down, down would she never come to an end. I wonder how many miles I've fallen by this time, she said. I must be getting somewhere near the center of the earth. Let me see. That was 1,000 miles down, I think. For you see, Alice had learned several things this morning schoolroom, and though this was not a very good opportunity for showing off her knowledge, no one to listen to her, still it was a good practice to say it over. Yes, the right distance, but then I wonder what latitude or longitude I've got to. Alice had not the slightest idea what latitude was, or longitude either, but she thought grand words to say. Presently she began again. I wonder if through the earth, how funny it'll seem to come out among the people with their heads downward. The antipathies, I think. Rather glad there was no one listening this time, as it didn't sound at all the right. But I shall have to ask them what the name of the country is, you know. Please, Maitland, or Australia. And she tried to curtsy as she spoke. Fancy curtsying as you air. Do you think you can manage it? What an ignorant little girl for asking. No, it'll never do to ask. Perhaps I shall see it written up. Down, down, down. There was nothing else to do, so Alice stood there talking again. Dinah'll miss me very much tonight. Dinah was the cat. I hope they'll remember her saucer of milk at tea time. I wish you were down here with me. There are no mice in the air, I'm afraid, but you might, and that's very like a mouse, you know. But do cats eat bats, I wonder? Began to get rather sleepy and went on saying to herself in a dreamy sort of way, eat bats. Do cats eat bats? And sometimes do bats eat cats? She couldn't answer either question. It didn't much matter which way she put it. She was dozing off, and had just begun to dream that she was walking hand in hand, and was saying to herself very earnestly, now, Dinah, tell me the truth, eat a bat, when suddenly, thump, thump, down she came upon a heap of high leaves, and the fall was over. Alice was not a bit hurt, and she jumped her feet in a moment, and she looked up, but it was dark overhead. Before her was a message, and the white rabbit was still in sight, hurrying down it. There was not a moment to be lost. Away went Alice like the wind, and was just in time to hear it say as it turned a corner, "Oh, my ears and blade it's getting!" She was close behind it when she turned the corner, but the longer to be seen. She found herself in a long, low hall, which was low of lamps hanging from the roof. There were doors all around the hall, but they were all locked. Alice had been all the way down one side and up the other, trying every door. She walked sad, wondering how she was ever to get out again. She came upon a little three-legged table, all made of solid glass. There was nothing but a tiny golden key, and Alice's first idea was that this might belong to one of them, but, alas, either the locks were too large or the key was too small, but it did not open any of them. However, on the second time round she came upon a low she had not noticed before, and behind it was a little door about 15 inches high. Tried the little golden key in the lock, and to her great delight it fitted. Alice found that it led into a small passage not much larger than a rat hole. Down and looked around along the passage into the loveliest garden you ever saw. How she longed to get out of that dark hall and wander about amongst those beds of bright and those cool fountains. But she could not even get her head through the doorway. And even if my head would go through, thought poor Alice, it would be a very little on my shoulders. Oh, how I wish I could shut up like a telescope. I think I could if I only knew how to begin. For you see, so many out-of-the-way things that Alice had begun to think that very few things indeed were really impossible. There seemed to be no use in waiting for the little door, so she went back to the table thinking she might find another key on it, or at any rate a book of rules about shutting people up. This time she found a little bottle on it, which certainly was not there before, and tied round the neck of the bottle was a paper label with the words "Drink Me" printed on it in large letters. It was all very well to say "drink me," but the wife is not going to do that in a hurry. No, I'll look first, she said, marked poison or not, for she had read several nice little story got burnt and eaten up by wild beasts and other unpleasant things, all because they were simple rules taught them their friends had taught them that a large hot poker will burn you if you hold it too long, and that if you cut your deeply with a knife, it usually bleeds. And she had never forgotten that if you have a bottle marked poison, it is almost certain to disagree with you sooner or later. However, this bottle was not marked poison, so Alice ventured to taste it, and finding it it had, in fact, a sort of mixed flavor of cherry tart, custard, roast turkey, toffee, and hot buttered toast. She very soon finished. What a curious feeling, said Alice. I must be shutting up like. And so it was, indeed. She was now only 10 inches high, and her face bright that she was now the right size for going through the little door into that lovely garden. First, however, she waited for a few minutes to see if she was going to shrink any further. She felt a little this, for it might end, you know, said Alice to herself. It might gather like a candle. I wonder what I should be like then. Fancy what the flame of a candle looks like after the candle is blown out, for she could not having seen such a thing. After a while, finding that nothing more had on going into the garden at once, but, alas, poor Alice, when she got to had forgotten the little golden key, and when she went back to the table for it, she found she could reach it. She could see quite plainly through the glass, and she tried her best with the legs of the table, but it was too slippery, and when she had tired herself out, the poor little thing sat down and cried. Come, there's no use in crying like that, said Alice to her son. I advise you to leave off this minute. She generally gave her advice, though she very seldom followed it. And sometimes she scolded her severely as to bring tears into her eyes, and once she remembered trying to box her own ears for having cheated in a game of croquet she was playing against herself. For this curious child was pretending to be two people. But it's no use now, thought poor Alan, to be two people. Why, there's hardly enough of me left to make one respectable person. Soon her eye fell on a little glass box that was lying beneath under the. She opened it and found in it a very small cake, on which the word was beautifully marked in currants. Well, I'll eat it, said Alice, and if it makes me grow the key, and if it makes me grow smaller, I can creep under the door. So either way, I don't care which happens. She ate a little bit and said anxiously to herself, holding her hand on the top of her head to feel which way it was growing. She was quite surprised to find that she remained the same size. To be sure, that happens when one eats cake, but Alice had got so much into the way of expecting nothing, the way things to happen, that it seemed quite dull and stupid for life to go on in the common. So she set to work, and very soon finished off the cake. The pool of tears. Curiouser and curiouser, cried out. She was so much surprised that for the moment she quite forgot how to speak good English, opening out like the largest telescope that ever was. Feet? For when she looked down at her feet, they seemed to be almost as they were getting so far off. Oh, my poor little feet, I wonder who will put on your stockings for you now. I'm sure I shan't be able to. I shall be too far off to trouble myself about you. You must manage the best way you can, but I must be kind to them, thought Alice, or perhaps they won't walk the way I want to go. Let me see, I'll give them a new pair of boots every Christmas. And she went on how she would manage it. They must go by the carrier, she thought, and how funny it'll be presents to one's own feet, and how odd the directions will be. Alice's right wire, hearth rug near the fender, with Alice's love. Nonsense, I'm talking. Just at this moment, her head struck against the of the hall. In fact, she was now rather more than 9 feet high, and she at once took up the little golden key and hurried off to the garden door. It was as much as she could do, lying down on one side to look through into the garden with one eye. But to get through was more hopeless than ever, and she sat down and began to cry again. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, said Alice. A great girl like you, she might well to go on crying in this way. Stop this moment, I tell you." But she went on gallons of tears until there was a large pool all around her, about reaching half down the hall. After a time she heard feet in the distance, and she hastily dried her eyes to see what was coming. It was the returning, splendidly dressed, with a pair of white kid gloves in one hand and a lot in the other. And she came trotting along in a great hurry, muttering to himself as he, the Duchess, oh, she won't she be savage if I kept her. Alice felt so desperate that she was ready to ask help of anyone. So when the rabbit came again in a low, timid voice, "If you please, sir," the rabbit started putting the white kid gloves in the fan and scurried away into the darkness as hard as he could go. Alice took up the fan and gloves, and as the hall was very hot, she kept fanning herself, and all the time she went on talking. "Dear, dear, how queer everything is today. Yesterday things went on just as normal. I wonder if I've been changed in the night. Was I the same when I got up this morning? I almost think I can remember feeling, but if I'm not the same, the next question is, who in the world am I? That's the great puzzle." And she began thinking over all the children she knew, and ages herself, to see if she could have been changed into any of them. "Not Ada," she said, for her hair goes in such long ringlets. Mine doesn't go in ringlets at all. And I'm sure I can't be Mabel, for I know all sorts of things. She knows such very little. Besides, she is she, and I'm I. Oh dear, how puzzling it all is. Try if I'll try if I know all now. Let me see. 4 times 5 is 12, and 4 times 6 is 13, times 7 is, oh dear, I shall never get a 20 at that rate. How in tables don't signify. Let's try geography. London is the capital. Where's the capital of Rome? And Rome, no, that's all wrong, I'm certain. I must, for Mabel, I'll try and say, how doth the little, and she crossed her hands on as if she were saying lessons, and began to repeat it. But her voice sounded hoarse and did not come the same as they used to. How doth the little crocodile improve tail, and pour the waters of the Nile on every golden scale? How cheerfully grin, how neatly spreads his claws, and welcomes little fishes in with gentle paws. I'm sure those are not the right words, said poor Alice, and her eyes fell, and she went on. I must be Mabel after all, and I shall have to go and live in that post, and have next to no toys to play with, and oh, ever so many lessons to learn. No, I've made up my mind about it. If I'm Mabel, I'll stay down here. It'll use their putting their heads down and saying, come up again, dear, and I shall up and say, who am I then? Tell me that first, and like being that person, I'll come up. If not, I'll stay down here till I'm somebody else. Oh dear, cried Alice with a sudden burst of tears. I do wish they would put their. I am so very tired of being all alone here. And she said this as she looked down at her hands, and was surprised to see that she had put on white kid gloves while she was talking. How can I? I must be growing small again. She got up and went to the table to measure herself. As nearly as she could guess, she was now about 2 feet high, and was going on. She soon found out that the cause of this was the fan she was holding hastily, just in time to save herself from shrinking away altogether. Narrow escape, said Alice, a good deal frightened at the sudden change, but very glad to find herself still in existence. And now for the garden, and she ran with all back to the little door, but alas, the little door was shut again, and the little golden key was table as before. And things are worse than ever, thought the poor child, for I never was this before, never, and I declare it's too bad, that it is. As she said these words, her foot slipped, and in another moment, splash, she was up to salt water. Her first idea was that she had somehow fallen into the sea. In that case I can go back by railway, she said to herself. Alice had been once in her life, and had come to the general conclusion that whenever you go to the English, you find a number of bathing machines in the sea, some children digging in the sand with spades, and a row of lodging houses and a railway station. However, soon she was in the pool of tears, which she had wept when she was 9 feet. I wish I hadn't cried so much, said Alice as she swam about, trying to find her way. I shall be punished for it now, I suppose, by being drowned in my own tears. It will be a queer thing, to be sure. However, everything is queer today. Just then she heard something splashing about in the pool a little way off, and she swam nearer to what it was. At first she thought it must be a walrus or a hippopotamus, but when she saw how small she was now, and she soon made out that it was only a mouse that had herself. Would it be of any use now, thought Alice, to speak to this mouse? The thing is so out of the way down here that I should think very likely it can talk. There is no harm in trying. So she began. Well, Mouse, do you know this pool? I am very tired of swimming about here, oh Mouse. This must be the right way of speaking to a mouse. She had never done such a thing before, but had seen in her brother's Latin grammar. A mouse, of a mouse, to a mouse, oh Mouse. The mouse looked at her rather inquisitively, and seemed to her one of its little eyes, but it said nothing. Perhaps it doesn't understand English. I dare say it's a French mouse, come over with William the Conqueror. For with all her knowledge of history, Alice had no very clear notion how long ago it went. So she began again. Où est ma chatte? Which is sentence in her French lesson book. The mouse gave a sudden leap out of the water, quiver all over with fright. Oh, I beg your pardon, cried Alice hastily, afraid to hurt the poor animal's feelings. I quite forgot you don't like cats. Not like cats, in a shrill, passionate voice. Would you like cats if you were me? Well, perhaps, said Alice in a soothing tone. Don't be angry about it, and yet I wish I could show you our cat Dinah. I think you'd take a fancy to cats if you could only see her. The dear, quiet thing. Alice went on, half to herself, as she swam about in the pond. And she sits purring so nicely by the fire, licking her paws, and she is such a nice, soft thing to nurse. And she's such a gun with catching mice. Oh, I beg your pardon, cried Alice again, for this time the mouse was bristling, felt certain it must be really offended. We won't talk about her any more. We indeed, cried the mouse, who was trembling down to the end of his tail. I would talk on such a subject. Our family always hated cats. Nasty little vulgar. Let me hear the name again. I won't indeed, said Alice, in a great subject of conversations. Are you fond of... The mouse did not answer so, and Alice went on eagerly. Here is a dog out near our house I should like to show you. A little bright-eyed terrier, you know. Such long, curly brown hair. And it'll fetch things when you throw them, and it'll sit up and beg for its dinner, and all sorts of things. I can't remember. Half belongs to a farmer, you know, and he says it's so useful it's worth £100. All the rats and... Oh, dear, said Alice in a sorrowful tone. I'm offended at it again, for the mouse was swimming away from her as hard as it could go, and making motion in the pool as it went. So she called softly after it, Mouse dear, come back again. And we won't talk about cats or dogs either, if you don't like them. Mouse heard this. It turned and swam slowly back to her. Its face was quite passion, Alice thought, and it said in a low, trembling voice, Get to the shore, and then I'll tell you my history, and you'll understand why it is I like dogs. It was high time to go, for the pool was getting quite crowded with the birds and animals to it. There was a duck and a dodo, a lory, and an egret, and several other curious creatures. Alice led the way, and the whole party swam. Chapter 3. A Caucus Race and a Long Tail. They were indeed a queer assembled on the bank, the birds with draggled feathers, the animals with clinging close to them, and all dripping wet, cross, and uncomfortable. Worst was how to get dry again, which they had a consultation about. For a few minutes it seemed quite natural to Alice to find herself talking familiar as if she had known them all her life. Indeed, she had quite a long argument with the Lord, who at last turned sulky and would only say, "I'm older than you and must know," and this Alice would not allow, no, without knowing how old it was, and as the Lady refused to tell its age, there was no more to be said. At last came to be a person of some authority among them, called out, "Sit, listen to me, I'll soon make you dry enough." They all sat down at once, in a large ring, with the mouse in the middle. Alice kept her eyes anxiously, for she felt sure she would catch a bad cold if she did not dry very soon. Said the mouse with an important air, "Are you all ready? This is the drum. Silence all round, if you please." William the Conqueror, who was favoured by the Pope, was now submitted to by the English, who wanted been of late much accustomed to usurpation conquest. Edwin and Morcar, the Earls of Mercia and North. "Ugh," said the Lorry with a shiver. "I beg your pardon," said the Mouse, frowning. "But did you speak?" "Not I," said the Lorry hastily. "I thought you did. I proceed. Edwin and Morcar, the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria, cared for him, and even Strigond, the patriotic of Canterbury, found it advisable. Found what?" said the duck. The mouse replied rather crossly, "Of course you know what it means. You know what it means well enough when I find a thing," said the duck, "but generally the frogger. The question is, what did the Archbishop find?" The mouse did not mention, but hurriedly went on. "Found it advisable to go with Edgar Athol and meet William and offer him the crown. William's conduct at first was moderate, but the influence of his Normans. How are we getting on now, my dear?" it concluded, turning as it spoke. "As wet as ever," said Alice in a melancholy tone. "It doesn't seem dull." "In that case," said the Dodo solemnly, rising to its feet, "I move for the immediate adoption of more energetic remedies." "Speak English," said the Eagle. "I don't know the meaning of half those words, and what's more, I don't believe you do either." The Eaglet bent down its head to hide a smile. Some of the other birds tittered audibly. "What I was going to say," said the Dodo in an offended tone, "was that the best thing to get would be a caucus race." "What is a caucus race?" said Alice. Not that she wanted much to know, had paused as if it thought that somebody ought to speak, and no one else seemed inclined. "Why," said the Dodo, "the best way to explain it is to do it. If you'd like to try and think the thing yourself some winter day, I will tell you how to manage it." First it marked out a race course in a sort of circle. "It doesn't matter," it said. And then all the party were placed along the course here, and there was no 1, 2, 3, and away, but they began running when they liked, and left off so that it was not easy to know when the race was over. However, in running half an hour or so, and were quite dry again, the Dodo suddenly called out, and they all crowded around it, panting and asking, "But who has won?" The Dodo could not answer without a great deal of thought, and it sat for a long time with one finger on its forehead, the position in which you usually see Shakespeare, while the rest waited in silence. At last the Dodo said, "Everybody, all must have prizes." "But who is to give the prizes?" Voices asked. "Why, she, of course," said the Dodo pointing to Alice, and the whole party at once crowded round her, calling out in a confused way, "Prizes! Prizes!" Alice had no idea what to do. Despair, she put her hand into her pocket and pulled out a box of comfits. Luckily, the sun got into it, and handed them round as prizes. There was excitement all round. "But she must have a prize herself, you know," said the Mouse. The Dodo replied very gravely, "What else have you got in your pocket?" He went on. "Only a thimble," said Alice sadly. "Hand it over here," said the Dodo, and they all crowded round her once more, while the Dodo solemnly presented the thimble. "We beg your acceptance of this elegant thimble." And when it had finished speech, they all cheered. Alice thought the whole thing very absurd. looked so grave that she did not dare to laugh, and, as she could not think of anything to say, she simply bowed and took the thimble, looking as solemn as she could. The next thing was to eat the comfits. This caused some noise and confusion, as the large birds could not taste theirs, and the small ones choked and had to be patted on the back. It was over at last, and they all sat down in a ring and begged the mouse to tell them. "You promised to tell me your history, you know," said Alice. "And why is it you hate and D?" she added in a whisper, half afraid that it would be offended again. "Long and sad tale," said the mouse, turning to Alice and sighing. "It is a long tale," said Alice, looking down with wonder at the mouse's tail. "But why do you call it sad?" She kept on puzzling about it while the mouse was speaking, so that her idea of the tale was. Fury said to a mouse he met in the house, "Let us both go to law. I will prosecute you." "Come, I'll take no denial. We must have a trial this morning. I've nothing to do," said the mouse to the cur. "Such a trial, with no jury or judge, would be wasting our breath." "I'll be judge, I'll be jury," said Cunning. "I'll try the whole cause and condemn you to death." "You are not," said the mouse to Alice severely. "What are you thinking of?" "I beg your pardon," said Alice very humbly. "I got to the fifth bend, I think." "I have not," cried the mouse angrily. "A knot," said Alice, always ready to make herself, and looking anxiously about her. "Oh, let me help you undo it." "I shall do nothing of the sort," getting up and walking away. "You insult me by talking such nonsense." "I didn't mean it, poor Alice, but you are so easily offended, you know." The Alice only growled away. "Please come back and finish your story," Alice called after it, and the others all joined. "Yes, please do." But the mouse only shook its head impatiently and walked a little quicker. "It wouldn't stay," sighed the Lory. As soon as it was quite out of sight, Crab took the opportunity of saying to her daughter, "Oh, my dear, let you never to lose your temper." "Hold your tongue, Ma," said the young crab a little. "You're enough to try the patience of an oyster." "Our Dinah here, I know I do," said Alice aloud, addressing nobody in particular. "She'd soon fetch him back." "And who is Dinah, if I might venture to ask the question, Laurie?" Alice replied eagerly, for she was always ready to talk about her. "Dinah's our cat, and she's such a capital one for catching mice, you can't think. And oh, I wish after the birds. Why, she'll eat a little bird as soon as look at it." This speech had a remarkable sensation among the party. Some of the birds hurried off at once. A magpie began wrapping itself up very carefully, remarking, "The night air doesn't suit my throat." And a canary called out in a trembling tone, "Come away, my dears, it's high time you were all in bed." On various moved off, and Alice was soon left alone. "I wish I hadn't mentioned Dinah," said in a melancholy way. "Nobody seems to like her down here, and I'm sure she's the best in the world. Oh, my dear little Dinah, I wonder if I shall ever see you any more." And here poor Alice began to cry again, for she felt very lonely and low-spirited. However,